Old man Fitzwilliam always said that Hollow Abbey had secrets buried deeper than its foundations, older than the oldest oak in the King's Wood. I was just a boy then, barely 10 summers old, with knees perpetually scraped from scrambling over the Abbey's crumbling walls and a head full of fantastical notions. My name is Thomas, and I lived with my widowed mother in a small cottage on the edge of the Abbey lands, close enough to hear the faint chime of their bells at dawn and dusk. The Abbey wasn't like other places. It sat in a hollow, just as its name suggested, nestled among hills that always seemed to wear a shroud of mist, even on the brightest days. Its stone walls were ancient, blackened by centuries of rain and wind, and its windows, narrow and high, looked out like vacant eyes. I spent most of my days exploring its forgotten corners, the places the monks, in their quiet piety, seemed to overlook. I knew every loose flagstone in the cloister, every creaky floorboard in the refectory, and every echo in the vast, cold nave. The monks themselves were a peculiar lot, especially to a boy who saw the world through wide, curious eyes. They moved like shadows, their brown habits blending into the Abbey's gloom, their sandals whispering on the stone floors. There was Brother Timothy, with his booming laugh that sometimes escaped the strictures of monastic life, and Brother Peter, always hunched over ancient texts, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Then there was Abbot Anselm, the head of them all, a man with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world, and a face etched with a silent, profound sorrow. Life around the Abbey was usually predictable, a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the church calendar. But in the late autumn of that year, something shifted. It began subtly, a ripple in the calm surface of our days. The bells, usually so punctual, sometimes tolled unevenly, a hurried, anxious sound that set the crows cawing in the trees. The monks, normally visible tending their gardens or fetching water from the well, became even more reclusive. Their daily processions to and from the chapel grew swifter, their heads bowed deeper, as if trying to hide their faces from the very air. My mother, a woman of simple faith and keen observation, noticed it too. "They're troubled, Thomas," she'd murmur, stirring the stew over our meager fire. "A dark cloud hangs over Hollow Abbey." I didn't fully grasp the meaning of her words then, but I felt the shift, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck whenever I ventured near the Abbey walls. One crisp morning, unusually cold for the season, I was playing near the old herb garden, a place the monks rarely visited anymore, perhaps because its medicinal plants had long since withered from neglect. The air was still, save for the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. Suddenly, I heard voices, hushed but urgent, coming from the chapter house, a place where the monks held their important meetings. I knew I shouldn't be listening, but my boyish curiosity often outweighed my good sense. I crept closer, pressing myself against the cold stone wall, trying to make sense of the muffled words. I couldn't distinguish individual phrases, but the tone was unmistakable. Fear and anger. A deep, resonant voice, which I recognized as Abbot Anselm's, rose above the others, though even his tone was strained, edged with desperation. "It must not be disturbed. The sanctity... consequences..." My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd never heard such agitation from the usually placid monks. What could be so terrifying that it disturbed the stoic abbot? I pressed my ear harder, to the stone, trying to catch more, but the voices receded, becoming indistinct murmurs once more, like bees buzzing in a distant hive. Then, the heavy oak door of the chapter house creaked open, and I darted behind a thick rose bush, its thorny branches scratching my cheek. Brother Peter emerged, his face ashen, his hands trembling as he pulled the door shut behind him. He looked around wildly, his eyes scanning the courtyard as if expecting someone to appear from the very shadows. He didn't see me. He hurried away, his usually measured steps, now a desperate shuffle, disappearing into the archway leading to the dormitory. A few days later, the strangeness escalated. Brother Timothy, the one with the booming laugh, stopped laughing altogether. His face, usually ruddy and jovial, turned pale and drawn, his eyes constantly darting, as if searching for something unseen. I saw him one afternoon, sitting alone on a stone bench in the cloister, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the empty fountain. He didn't seem to notice me when I walked past, which was unusual. Brother Timothy always had a kind word or a pat on the head for me. I lingered, pretending to tie my bootlace, hoping he would speak. But he remained silent, lost in a private, troubling world. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but a strange apprehension held my tongue. Even at my young age, I sensed that this was not a matter for a curious boy to inquire about. Then came the night of the storm. The wind howled like a banshee through the barren trees, and the rain lashed against our cottage windows, sounding like 1,000 angry spirits. My mother had lit every candle, trying to ward off the encroaching darkness and the chill. I lay, in my small bed, listening to the tempest when I heard it, not the wind, but a different sound, cutting through the din. It was the Abbey bell, ringing furiously, but not in its usual solemn chime. This was a frantic peal, a desperate clangor, as if someone were pulling the rope with all their might, then letting go, then pulling again in a chaotic rhythm of alarm. My mother rushed to the window, pulling back the thick woolen curtain. "Thomas, listen," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Something is terribly wrong." The bell continued its frenzied ringing for what felt like an eternity. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise, an unnatural void in the heart of the storm. I clutched my threadbare blanket, my small body trembling. What could make the usually measured monks ring the alarm bell in such a manner? And why did it stop so suddenly? The wind still raged, the rain still beat down, but the human cry from the Abbey had ceased. We waited, my mother and I, in the flickering candlelight, listening to the storm, but no other sound came from the direction of Hollow Abbey. No shouts, no further bells, just the relentless roar of the elements. It was as if the Abbey had swallowed its own cries. The next morning, when the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean but heavy with a strange quiet, the villagers gathered, whispering. No one had dared to approach the Abbey in the dark of the night. But now, with the first hint of dawn, a few brave souls, led by old Farmer Giles, started making their way up the muddy track towards the ancient monastery. My mother, with a worried glance at me, said, "Stay here, Thomas. Stay indoors." But I was a boy driven by an insatiable curiosity and a growing sense of dread. As soon as her back was turned, busying herself with breakfast, I slipped out the door and followed the faint trail left by the villagers. The air around the Abbey felt different that morning, colder, heavier, even though the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. A silence, unlike the usual peaceful quiet, hung over the place. It was the silence of something broken, something missing. As I drew closer, I saw the small group of villagers clustered by the main gate, their faces pale and drawn. Farmer Giles was pushing at the heavy oak door, which usually stood ajar during the day, but now it was firmly shut. There was no response to his knocking, no brother gatekeeper to greet them. A shiver ran down my spine. This was wrong, terribly wrong. After several attempts, Farmer Giles and another man, strong young John, put their shoulders to the gate. With a groan of ancient wood and rusted iron, it slowly gave way, swinging inward just enough for them to squeeze through. I, small and quick, slipped in behind them before anyone could stop me. The courtyard was eerily deserted. No monks tending. The gardens, No sounds of chanting from the chapel. The air was still, oppressive. We walked cautiously, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the cobblestones. The chapel door was open, a rectangle of deeper shadow within the already dim interior. Farmer Giles, his face grim, pushed it wider. The sight inside froze us all. The chapel, usually filled with the gentle hum of prayer or the solemn strains of chant, was utterly silent and empty, or so it seemed at first. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw them. On the cold stone floor, scattered like discarded cloaks, were the bodies of the monks. Not all of them, but many. Their brown habits were disheveled, their faces turned to the ceiling, mouths agape in silent screams. No blood, no obvious wounds, just stillness, a profound, unnatural stillness. Brother Timothy, Brother Peter, even the stoic Abbot Anselm, all lay there, motionless. It wasn't the violence I saw that was horrifying, but the sheer, inexplicable silence, the sudden, impossible emptiness where life had been only hours before. My breath hitched in my throat. The murdered monks of Hollow Abbey. The phrase formed. In my mind, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. This was not a dream. This was real. And I, Thomas, had seen it. The silence in the chapel was thick and cold, heavier than the fog that sometimes clung to the abbey walls. Farmer Giles, a man usually as solid and unyielding as the earth he tilled, looked as if he might crumble. His jaw hung slack, and his eyes, normally sharp and practical, were wide with disbelief. Young John, who had been so eager to push open the gate, recoiled, pressing himself against the doorframe, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. Other villagers who had followed us cautiously peered in, their hushed murmurs dying instantly as they took in the grim scene. No one spoke for a long moment, the only sound the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. It was Farmer Giles who finally broke the spell, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Saints preserve us." "What? What is this?" He stepped further, into the chapel, cautiously, as if the very air might hold danger. I followed, my small legs carrying me despite the tremor that ran through them. The bodies lay scattered, not in any discernible pattern. Some near the altar, others closer to the pews. Their faces, pale and peaceful in a way that was unsettling, held no hint of struggle or pain. It was as if they had simply laid down and ceased to breathe. No pools of blood, no overturned furniture, no signs of a fight. Just death, quiet and absolute. A few more brave villagers entered, their eyes darting nervously from body to body. Old Mistress Ilara, who sometimes helped my mother with mending, let out a soft wail, clutching her chest. "The good brothers! Who could do such a thing?" Her question hung in the air, unanswered, unanswerable. My gaze fell upon Brother Timothy, his usually jovial face now serene in its final repose. His hand was slightly open, and I noticed something glinting faintly beneath it. A small, dark object, almost hidden by the folds of his habit. My curiosity, though dulled by fear, still flickered. The adults were too engrossed in the horror of the scene to notice such a small detail. As Farmer Giles knelt beside Abbot Anselm, his weathered hand reaching out hesitantly, as if to check for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there, I quietly edged my way closer to Brother Timothy. My hand trembled as I reached out and gently nudged his habit. The object was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than my thumb. It was dark, almost black, and felt smooth and cold beneath my fingers. I remembered Brother Timothy always carried such a carving, a gift from a traveling merchant years ago. A piece of something he held dear. But this wasn't his usual carving. His was a robin. This was a raven, its wings tucked close to its body, its eyes tiny, unnerving chips of glass. It seemed out of place, ominous. I quickly slipped it into my pocket. My secret, a small piece, of the puzzle no one else seemed to see. "But where are the others?" someone asked, a sharp, fearful question that cut through the stunned silence. Indeed, as we counted the fallen, it became clear. Not all the monks were present. There were 15 brothers residing at Hollow Abbey, and only 12 bodies lay before us. 3 were missing. Had they escaped? Were they the perpetrators? The questions multiplied, each more terrifying than the last. A murmur rippled through. The villagers. The missing monks. Brother Thomas, a quiet, scholarly monk, was not among the dead. Nor was young Brother Benedict, the youngest member of the Abbey, barely older than myself, who had joined only a few months prior. And Brother Elias, the Abbey's taciturn, gaunt gatekeeper, who was always the first to greet visitors, was also absent. His usual post at the gate was empty, the heavy door left unbarred, a stark symbol of the violation. Panic, cold and insidious, began to set in. If the murderers were still loose, if some of the monks had vanished, what did it mean for us? For the village? Whispers turned to urgent discussions. Fearful glances were cast towards the surrounding woods, towards the winding path that led back to our homes. Farmer Giles, regaining some of his composure, ordered young John and another man to ride to the nearest town, Kingsbridge, and fetch the sheriff. It was a day's ride, perhaps more, considering the muddy roads after the storm. Until then, we were on our own. My mother found me then, pushing through the small crowd, her face a mask of terror when she saw me standing there, gazing at the dead. She pulled me close, her arms tight around me, burying my face in her woolen shawl. "Thomas, I told you to stay," she whispered fiercely. But her voice broke, and I knew it was more out of relief than anger. I didn't tell her about the wooden raven. It felt too important, too heavy for a boy to share, especially with her already burdened heart. The day stretched on, long and bleak. The villagers, now a mix of grim determination and palpable fear, began to carry the bodies out of the chapel, laying them gently on the cloister grass, covering their still faces with cloths. No one touched them directly, as if the strange, bloodless death itself was contagious. The rain began to fall again, a soft, sorrowful drizzle that mirrored the mood. The Abbey, once a beacon of peace and spiritual solace, now felt like a tomb, a place of profound despair and unsettling questions. Rumors, like weeds, began to sprout and twist through the village as word spread. Some spoke of bandits, though there was nothing of value taken from the Abbey that anyone could discern. No overturned chests, no signs of forced entry beyond the initially barred main gate. Others whispered of a curse, of ancient spirits disturbed. From their slumber deep within the earth of Hollow Abbey, a tale old Fitzwilliam often spun. I listened, my small mind trying to piece together the fragments. But nothing made sense. How could so many men, strong and devout, simply die? Without a mark, without a sound, save for that desperate cut-off bell? As dusk approached, the sheriff and his small contingent of men finally arrived, their horses splashing through the mud. The sheriff, a stern man named Bartholomew, with a bushy beard and an air of weary authority, surveyed the scene with cold, appraising eyes. He listened to Farmer Giles's breathless account, his gaze sweeping over the silent bodies, the open chapel door. His brows furrowed. "No signs of struggle, you say? No wounds?" His voice was deep, laced with a professional skepticism that offered little comfort. He dispatched a few of his men to search the Abbey grounds, and others to question the villagers, though no one had seen or heard anything beyond the storm and the frantic bell. I watched, hidden behind my mother's skirts, as the sheriff's men moved through the Abbey. They were thorough, searching every nook and cranny, but they found nothing. No weapon, no clue, no trace of the missing monks, The Abbey seemed to swallow all secrets, revealing only the dead. That night, the village was filled with a new kind of fear. The comforting routines were shattered. No one dared to venture out after dark, and every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl sent shivers down spines. My mother kept me close, her grip on my hand tighter than usual. I could feel her unspoken fear, a cold, heavy weight. Lying in my bed, the small wooden raven pressed into my palm, I couldn't sleep. The image of the silent, fallen monks filled my mind. And the missing ones. Brother Thomas, Brother Benedict, Brother Elias. Where were they? Were they dead too, hidden somewhere, or were they somehow involved? The tiny raven seemed to pulse with a silent question, its glass eyes reflecting the faint moonlight that pierced through our window. It felt like a dark secret, a key to something terrible. I knew, with the certainty only a child possesses, that this was just the beginning. Hollow Abbey had given up its dead, but its true secrets remained, buried, waiting to be unearthed. And I, Thomas, with a small carved bird in my pocket, felt an unwilling pull towards them. I knew I couldn't stay away. The days that followed the discovery at Hollow Abbey were shrouded in a gloom deeper than any winter fog. The sheriff, Bartholomew, remained in the village, his presence a constant grim reminder of the horror that had unfolded. His men, tired and frustrated, searched the Abbey and its surrounding lands day after day, their boots leaving muddy tracks on the paths I once explored so freely. But they found nothing. No weapon, no clue, no sign of Brother Thomas, Brother Benedict, or Brother Elias. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. The official pronouncement from the sheriff was brief and unsatisfying. A terrible tragedy. The cause of death remains unknown. He spoke of a mysterious illness, a sudden plague, but no one in the village truly believed it. We had seen their faces, the quiet terror that had settled upon the Abbey before that fateful night. My mother, like many others, forbade me from going near the Abbey. She kept me close, her eyes frequently scanning the distant, mist-shrouded ruins. But the wooden raven in my pocket burned with a secret heat, a silent call that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a nagging sense that I held a piece of the truth, a fragment that the adults, in their fear and confusion, had overlooked. I spent hours turning the small carving over in my fingers, tracing its smooth, dark curves. Its tiny glass eyes seemed to watch me, to hold a hidden message. Why had Brother Timothy, a man who always carried a robin carving, been found with this raven? One afternoon, a few days after the sheriff's departure, I slipped away. My mother was busy tending to a sick neighbor, and the temptation of the Abbey, of the unanswered questions, was too strong to resist. The air was crisp, the sky a dull, overcast gray that matched the mood in my heart. As I approached the Abbey, the silence was profound, broken only by the caw of a distant crow. No monks, no bells, just the empty wind whistling through shattered window panes. It felt colder here now, permeated by the chill of death. I entered through the main gate, which now stood permanently ajar, a silent invitation to the brave or the foolish. My footsteps echoed loudly in the cloister, a sound that usually would have been absorbed by the murmur of monastic life. I walked directly to the chapel, drawn by an invisible thread. The bodies had been removed, and the stone floor had been scrubbed clean, but the faint, lingering scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cold, seemed to hang in the air. I walked slowly, my eyes scanning every inch, looking for anything, any detail, any whisper of what had happened. Nothing. The chapel remained an inscrutable tomb. Then, something caught my eye. A faint scratch mark on one of the ancient stone columns near where Abbot Anselm's body had lain. It was low, just above my eye level, too low for an adult to make without bending down. It wasn't a casual mark. It was deliberate, a series of faint, almost invisible lines. I traced them with my finger. They weren't letters, not in any language I knew. They were more like symbols, crude and hastily drawn. A circle with a dot in the middle, a broken line, a jagged zigzag. They reminded me, oddly, of the marks I'd seen the old shepherd, Elms, make on his gatepost to count his sheep, but more cryptic. Was this a dying message? A desperate attempt to leave a clue? I had no idea what they meant, but I stored them in my mind, another piece of the puzzle. My search then led me to the dormitory, a long Spartan room with rows of narrow beds, each with a wooden chest at its foot. The sheriff's men had undoubtedly searched here, but I felt a childish certainty that they wouldn't look with the same eyes as I. I moved from bed to bed, my heart thumping. Most of the chests were empty, or contained only a few meager belongings. But when I reached Brother Thomas's bed, I noticed something peculiar. The chest was slightly ajar, and a small, loose floorboard beneath it seemed to have been recently disturbed. I knelt, my fingers fumbling with the loose board. It lifted easily, revealing a small, shallow cavity. Inside, wrapped in a piece of old linen, was a single, aged book. It wasn't a prayer book or a scholarly tome. Its cover was plain leather, worn smooth with age, and it had no title. It felt different from the other books in the Abbey library. Something about it radiated an aura of forgotten secrets. I pulled it out, my fingers tingling as they touched the ancient binding. This was Brother Thomas's, the scholarly monk who was now missing. I glanced around nervously. The silence of the dormitory was oppressive, but I had to know what was inside. I carefully unwrapped the linen. The pages within were brittle and yellowed, filled with neat, cramped handwriting, not in Latin, but in our common tongue. I couldn't read all of it, not yet, but I could make out some words and phrases. It wasn't a story or a collection of prayers. It was a journal, a chronicle of observations and thoughts. And as I turned the pages, a name leaped out at me, repeated, again and again, in Brother Thomas's meticulous script. The Labyrinth. My blood ran cold. The Labyrinth. Old man Fitzwilliam had spoken of it, a whispered legend among the villagers. A secret network of tunnels beneath Hollow Abbey, rumored to have been built by the first monks, not for escape, but for something far older, far more mysterious. He said it was a place of power, of ancient secrets, and that it should never be disturbed. No one believed him, of course. It was just a tale for children. But now, seeing it written in Brother Thomas's hand, alongside the terror that had consumed the Abbey, it felt horrifyingly real. I tucked the journal inside my tunic, next to the wooden raven. These were secrets now, heavy burdens that pressed against my small chest. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring more, driven by a growing sense of urgency. I checked the kitchen, the refectory, the storerooms. Nothing. No more bodies, no more obvious clues. The missing monks remained a mystery. But the journal and the raven felt connected, two threads of a dark tapestry. As the sun began to dip below, the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, I made my way out of the Abbey, my heart a mixture of fear and strange exhilaration. I had found something important. I knew I couldn't tell my mother, not yet. She would only forbid me from returning, and I knew deep down that I had to understand. I had to know what had happened to the monks, to the Abbey, and what the labyrinth truly was. Back in our cottage, as my mother prepared our simple supper, I sat by the fire, pretending to read an old book of fables. But my mind was miles away, in the cold, silent halls of Hollow Abbey. The wooden raven was still in my pocket, and the journal, its secrets still mostly unread, lay hidden beneath my straw mattress. I wondered if Brother Thomas had been trying to warn someone, to leave a message. And I wondered what the labyrinth truly meant, and why it had consumed the Abbey. That night, as the wind sighed mournfully through the trees, I knew my life, and the life of our quiet village had changed forever. The murdered monks of Hollow Abbey were not just a tragedy, they were a mystery, and I, Thomas, had accidentally stumbled into its dark heart. That night, sleep was a fleeting, unwelcome visitor. The wooden raven lay tucked beneath my pillow, its coldness a constant presence against my cheek. Brother Thomas's journal, carefully hidden beneath my straw mattress, felt like a silent, heavy weight. The words I had glimpsed, the labyrinth, echoed in my mind, intertwining with the memory of the dead monks and the eerie silence of the Abbey. Every creak of the cottage, every gust of wind against the window sounded like a footstep, a whisper from the haunted monastery. I yearned for dawn, for the safety of daylight, yet dreaded it too, knowing it would bring new questions, new impulses to return to the Abbey. The moment my mother left for the market the next morning, her warnings still ringing in my ears, I retrieved the journal. My hands trembled slightly as I untied the worn leather thong that bound its pages. The script, though neat, was difficult for my young eyes to decipher fully, but I was determined. I found a quiet spot by the hearth, where the dying embers still offered a faint warmth, and began to pore over Brother Thomas's meticulous entries. The first few pages chronicled the mundane life of the Abbey, weather observations, notes on the harvest, minor disputes among the brothers. But then, the entries began to shift. They became more frequent, more agitated. Dates became erratic, sometimes only a day apart, sometimes weeks, and the subject matter grew darker. Brother Thomas wrote of unusual vibrations emanating from deep within the Abbey's foundations, a low hum that few others seemed to notice, or perhaps chose to ignore. He described faint, almost imperceptible shifts in the temperature of certain stone walls, a coldness that defied the season. He noted the increasing reclusiveness of Abbot Anselm and the subtle fear that began to grip the older monks. Abbot Anselm speaks in riddles, one entry read. He says the ancient compact is weakening. He speaks of a custody we are bound by, though the vows I took mentioned no such thing. What burden does this Abbey truly bear? My eyes widened as I read. A compact? A custody? What could he mean? Then an entry, dated just a few weeks before the massacre, made my breath catch in my throat. The tremor is stronger. It comes from below the old crypt. I fear the labyrinth stirs. Abbot Anselm believes the wards are failing. He has tasked Brother Elias with guarding the entrance, even in the dead of night, against... What? He says it is not a spirit we face, but something far older, far more demanding. The crypt. I knew the crypt. It was a dark, damp place beneath the chapel, rarely visited, where the remains of long-dead abbots and important benefactors of the Abbey rested. I had only ever peeked into its shadowed depths, deterred by the smell of damp earth and decay. But Brother Thomas's words painted a different picture, a hidden entrance, a failing ward, and something demanding beneath. He wrote extensively about the labyrinth itself. It wasn't just a network of tunnels, but a place of ancient power, built not by the Abbey's founders, but by a people who existed long before, those who came before the first stone was laid. He spoke of rituals performed by the early monks, not to worship, but to appease whatever lay within, to keep the balance. The previous compact, he explained, was broken generations ago by an abbot who, out of fear or greed, had tried to manipulate the power, unleashing something that caused a terrible blight on the land, though the details were vague and hinted at more than just crop failure. The current compact, as Abbot Anselm had called it, was a fragile truce, maintained by constant vigilance and specific, arcane rituals known only to the abbots and a select few of the most trusted brothers. A particularly chilling entry scrawled, hastily and almost illegibly described a breach. The wards are failing. Brother Elias reports a chill, a whisper from the deepest passages. He saw something. Something not of this world. It beckons. Abbot Anselm has called for a final ritual. We pray it holds. The raven. It is the ancient sign. The harbinger. The raven. My fingers instinctively tightened around the wooden, carving in my pocket. The harbinger. Was this why Brother Timothy had the raven? Was he one of the trusted brothers aware of the deeper secrets? And what was it a harbinger of? The last entries in the journal were fragmented, desperate. The chanting began, but it was not our chant, a deeper resonance from beneath. The air grows cold. They are not responding. Brother Benedict, he went down. Abbot Anselm screams, Elias. I hear the bells. No, it is not us. It is them. The labyrinth. It opens. The entry abruptly ended there. The ink smeared on the page as if Brother Thomas had dropped his quill in terror. My hands were shaking. The journal was not just a record. It was a testament, a final, terrifying witness to what had transpired. The monks hadn't just been murdered. They had been consumed by something from within the abbey, from the labyrinth. And the frantic bell ringing was not an alarm for help, but perhaps a final, desperate plea or a distorted echo of the deeper resonance Brother Thomas had mentioned. Suddenly, the small cottage felt suffocating. The ordinary sounds of the village outside seemed distant, unreal. I looked at the wooden raven, now understanding its grim significance. It was a warning, a symbol of what was emerging from the depths, and the scratch marks on the chapel column, the circle, the broken line, the zigzag, perhaps they were a simplified representation of the wards or symbols from the ancient compact, a last desperate attempt by Abbot Anselm to leave a clue about what was attacking them. The journal made it clear. The missing monks were not perpetrators but likely victims, or perhaps, as in Brother Benedict's case, drawn into the labyrinth itself. Brother Elias, guarding the entrance, might have been overwhelmed, pulled into its depths, or somehow silenced. My mind raced. I had to go back. I had to find the entrance to this labyrinth. If Brother Benedict had gone down, perhaps he was, still alive. A foolish thought, perhaps, for a boy, but a spark of hope in the face of such overwhelming darkness. And if the labyrinth was truly open, if something was truly loose beneath Hollow Abbey, then the entire village, my mother included, was in terrible danger. I couldn't tell anyone about the journal, not yet. They wouldn't believe me, or they would forbid me from acting, and precious time would be lost. This burden, these terrifying truths, rested squarely on my young shoulders. I carefully rewrapped the journal and hid it again. I clutched the wooden raven tightly, its dark form a silent promise. My path was clear, terrifying though it was. I had to return to Hollow Abbey. I had to find the crypt, and I had to find the labyrinth. I was just a boy, but I was the only one who held the pieces of this dark puzzle, and the fate of the village, perhaps even more, rested on what I discovered next. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across our cottage. The abbey, visible in the distance, seemed to loom, a silent ancient maw waiting to swallow more secrets.